The Aleutian Islands were not the only territories in North America to be attacked by Japan. About a week after the attack on Pearl Harbor, 9 submarines of the Japanese 6th Fleet arrived off the North American Pacific coast. They were tasked with performing reconnaissance and disrupting shipping lanes. Some of these submarines would go a step further and carry out attacks on the mainland of North America. This episode will be on the war on the American Pacific coast. Your continued support allows us to expand our work, and we're so grateful for that. We're always eager to create more videos for you, and we think that you'll enjoy our documentaries on post-World War II history over on the Cold War channel, and our Wizards and Warriors channel, which focuses on the fantasy and sci-fi lore battle documentaries. We've also recently started a TikTok channel, and would appreciate your support on that new platform. Consider subscribing to all 3. The links are in the description and pinned comment. Thanks for being with us. On December 10th, the Japanese learned that an American Lexington-class carrier was heading for the US mainland and sent 9 out of 12 submarines operating around Hawaii to pursue and sink the enemy carrier. After a stressful 4 days, the search proved fruitless. Afterwards, a new role was established for the submarines. They were to take up positions at designated sites off the Pacific coast and begin attacking Allied merchant shipping. Vice Admiral Mitsumi Shimizu, commander of the Japanese submarine forces, would direct Rear Admiral Tsutomu Sato on his flagship I-9 for the operations. These 9 submarines had a range of approximately 15,000 miles and a surface speed of around 23 knots, armed with up to 18 torpedoes and 5.5-inch deck guns. An hour before dawn on December 18th, the I-17 attacked the US freighter Samoa, which was carrying lumber to San Diego. The I-17 fired 5 times upon her with her 5.5-inch guns, doing light damage, and at a distance of 70 feet, shot 1 torpedo, which passed under the Samoa, missing. Luckily for the Samoa, the torpedo's explosion made the Japanese think she was hit and sinking, so they submerged and left the scene, allowing the Samoa to escape to San Diego. On December 20th, the I-17 found the Seconee Vacuum Oil Company's tanker Emidio 20 miles off the coast of Cape Mendocino. Captain Clark Farrow of the Emidio, upon discovering the I-17 a quarter mile to his stern, sent an SOS as he tried to outrun the raider, but was rapidly overtaken at 20 knots. The I-17 opened fire with its deck gun, with the first shot taking out the Emidio's radio antenna. 2 more shots struck into the Emidio's hull as the ship hoisted a white flag and the crew took to its lifeboats. One of the salvos hit a lifeboat carrying 3 crewmen, who fell into the water and would drown as a result of choppy seas. 5 shots in total would hit the Emidio before the I-17 would suddenly submerge as 2 US bombers had arrived, responding to the SOS sent out 15 minutes prior. The 2 bombers dropped depth charges before leaving. After the planes left, the I-17 resurfaced and launched a torpedo, hitting the Emidio in her stern, passing through her engine room and killing 2 crewmen, before the I-17 would submerge and flee the scene. The Emidio drifted until it ran aground off the rocks of Crescent City in early January 1942. At about the same time Emidio was attacked, the I-23 was stalking the US tanker SS Agweworld 20 miles off Cypress Point near Santa Cruz. At 2:15 p.m., an explosion off the stern of the ship alerted the captain, Frederick Gonsalves, to run for the bridge. 500 yards away, the I-23 tried to get broadside of the frantically zigzagging tanker, but was unable to outmaneuver her while simultaneously firing. The I-23 shot 8 shells as the tanker neared land, missing her, and submerged in failure. On the morning of December 22nd, the Standard Oil Company tank, SS HM Story, was 55 miles north of Santa Barbara as the I-19, commanded by Captain Narahara Sei-Go, stalked her for over an hour. When the HM Story was 2 miles off Point Aguelo, the I-19 shot 3 torpedoes, missing her with each. a US Navy plane saw her and began to drop depth charges, forcing the I-19 to submerge and flee the scene. At 5:30 am on December 23rd, the SS Montebello, sailing from Port St. Louis bound for Vancouver, was hit amidship by a torpedo launched from I-21, luckily hitting the only compartment not loaded with gasoline. The crew was forced to abandon ship as the I-21 began to shell them at point-blank range. As 36 men in 4 lifeboats began rowing for safety, the I-21 opened fire with machine guns on the helpless sailors, but luckily for them, visibility was quite poor and no one was wounded. On the morning of December 24th, the lumber schooner Barbara Olson was sailing for San Diego when she was rocked by an explosion 100 feet off her seaward side. None of her crew would know what caused the explosion, but it was a torpedo launched from I-19. The torpedo had gone under her and blown up on the other side. 4 hours later, the I-19 was a few miles north off Point Fermin, where it found the freighter SS Absaroka entering the Catalina Channel. The I-19 shot 2 torpedoes, with one striking 50 feet aft of the beam, sending lumber into the air and killing a man. Though she was injured and tilting, she did not sink, but instead managed to beach herself off Port MacArthur. The I-9 left the west coast for Panama on December the 20th, and as a planned finale to the 7 days of attacking the west coast shipping, the 8 remaining submarines were to make attacks on Christmas Day. They would select a choice of mainland targets to fire 30 rounds each from their deck guns at, and then withdraw to the Marshall Islands. However, on December 22nd, an unexpected order was received postponing the attack to December 27th from Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto wanted to avoid attacking during the Christian festival out of fear of offending their German and Italian allies. There was also a fear of American reprisal attacks. 5 days later, the Rear Admiral, Tsutomu Sato, on the flagship I-9, notified headquarters the submarine force was low on fuel, and this would complicate the return to Japan, so Yamamoto called off the attack altogether. Despite the order, one submarine, the I-15, lingering around the Farallon Islands, decided to do something daring. Before departing like the rest, Captain Ishikawa Nobuo fired at least one torpedo at the Golden Gate Bridge. Fortunately, it ended up missing its target and embedded in a sandbank off Marshall's Beach, and was found later in 1946. After the submarine attacks of December 1941, US coastal defenses were strengthened. On February 23, 1942, the first Axis ship would shell the US mainland. At 7:07 p.m., while Franklin D. Roosevelt was commencing a fireside chat, the I-17, captained by Nishino Kozo, stopped right beside Ellwood Richfield Oil Company refinery. The I-17 proceeded to fire the first of 17 rounds aimed at the Richfield aviation fuel tank stored behind the beach. Most of the shells fell into the water, overshot the target, or landed as duds. By 7:35, assuming the Americans would be hot on his tail, Nishino fired his last round and retreated. The attack only did slight damage, but caused immense panic, as mainland America had been attacked. Local residents of Ellwood jumped into their cars and drove madly inland, trying to escape a potential invasion. Captain Hagen and a master sergeant were sent to the refinery to defuse the dud rounds, and one detonated, sending shrapnel to hit Hagen. Hagen would be America's only assigned service member to receive a Purple Heart for a wound received by enemy attack on American soil. The submarine attacks of December had caused the US to increase its coastal defenses, and the American people's paranoia of possible attacks. When the Ellwood oil field was shelled by I-17, it set in a hysteria. On February 24th, the Office of Naval Intelligence issued a warning that an attack on mainland California could be expected within the next 10 hours. At around midnight, a report was sent out to anti-aircraft batteries on the heights overlooking the Los Angeles area that enemy planes had been spotted. Air raid sirens began to sound off at 2:25 a.m. throughout Los Angeles County, and a total blackout was ordered as thousands of air raid wardens rushed to their positions. At 3:16 am, the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing their 50 caliber machine guns and 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the air. Over 1,400 shells were fired sporadically until 4:14 am. Several buildings and vehicles were damaged by shell fragments, with 5 indirect civilian deaths. This became known as the infamous Battle of Los Angeles, and in 1983, the Air Force reported the entire event was attributed to the sighting of a runaway weather balloon and war panic. On June 7th, the I-26, after taking part in the opening stages of the Aleutian Islands campaign, began to stalk the SS Coast Trader as it left the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The I-26 fired a torpedo, hitting the Coast Trader in her starboard side, flooding her quickly. Then the I-26 turned her attention to a new enemy, Canada. At around 10 PM on June 20th, the I-26 was patrolling the coast of British Columbia when it surfaced 2 miles off the Estevan Point lighthouse. The I-26 began to open fire with its deck gun. This was the first direct attack on Canadian territory since the Fenian raids of the 1860s. R.M. Lally, the lightkeeper at Estevan Point, heard the salvos crashing into the surf below and hurried down the spiral staircase to warn his wife to take cover before he doused the light. A veteran of the Great War, he stayed to observe the shelling. Fortunately, the I-26 missed over 17 shots against the lighthouse. Although the I-26 failed to hit its target, the aftermath caused a disproportionate effect on coastal shipping, as all lighthouses along the coast were extinguished in fear of their use by the enemy. Near where the Columbia empties into the Pacific Ocean stands Fort Stevens, an American military installation built near the end of the American Civil War. By 1941, it held 10-inch coastal defense guns, antiques left over from World War I, 2 12-inch mortars, and a few 6-inch disappearing guns. The fort was manned by the Oregon Army National Guard's 249th Coast Artillery Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lifton M. Irwin, and the 18th Coast Artillery. On June 21st, just before midnight, the I-25, captained by Meiji Tagumi, had been following some fishing boats to avoid minefields in the area, when it surfaced at the mouth of the Columbia River and began to fire 17 rounds from its deck gun in the direction of Fort Stevens. Tagumi expected immediate return fire, so he ordered his gun crew to fire as quickly as possible without bothering to aim properly. Lieutenant Colonel Lifton M. Irwin ordered an immediate blackout of the fort and refused to permit his men to return fire, which would have revealed their positions. Some of the shells landed in a nearby baseball field, destroying its backstop. One shell landed close to Battery Russell, another next to a concrete pillbox, and one severed several large telephone cables. The I-25 made a hasty escape after doing little to no damage, but the attack on Fort Stevens, along with the Aleutian Islands campaign, helped create the 1942 full-scale West Coast invasion scare. With so many operations doing minimal damage, one Japanese officer would try to step up to the challenge to strike at North America. Warrant Flying Officer Nobuo Fujita was aboard the I-25 during a deployment in the Aleutian Islands campaign. In the spring of 1942, he had flown above Kodiak Island at 9,000 feet and observed that the American response to an unidentified plane was complete indifference. This led Fujita to suggest an air raid against the American Pacific coast, utilizing a Yokosuka E-14Y Glenn floatplane. This particular plane was capable of being stored and launched from submarines to perform reconnaissance and small-scale bombing operations. The Glenn had folding wings and was transported in a watertight capsule attached to the deck of a submarine, such as the I-25. The proposal was endorsed by Prince Takamatsu, a younger brother of Emperor Hirohito, who was enticed by a Japanese official who had been previously assigned to the consulate in Seattle, Washington, who mentioned that late summer was quite dry in the Pacific Northwest. Thus it was decided the air raid would drop incendiary bombs to ignite major forest fires. On August 14, 1942, the I-25 left to make what would be the final Japanese attack on the American coast and a reprisal for the Doolittle raid. On September 9th, after arriving off the Oregon coast, Fujita and his bombardier, Petty Officer Shoji Okuda, propelled off the I-25, carrying two 168-pound incendiary bombs. They flew 50 miles eastwards, passing over Cape Blanco. On Mount Emily Fire Tower in Siskiyou National Forest, Howard Raz Gardner spotted and reported the Glen. 50 miles inland, Fujita dropped the first bomb, and 6 miles farther, the second. Both bombs exploded, but the foliage was too damp from rain to allow for the fires to develop quickly. Fire Warden Gardner and USFS fire lookout Keith V. Johnson hiked to Wheeler Ridge, where there was a small fire emerging. Both men worked throughout the night to contain the fire, and by morning an additional fire crew arrived to help. Fujita performed a second raid on September 29th in the same general locale. Fujita reasoned that no one would expect a repeat attack. He flew 90 minutes inland this time and let 2 bombs release over Grassy Knob near Port Orford, Oregon. However, even less came of these bombs, as yet again wet foliage refused to start a wildfire. 20 years later, in 1962, Fujita was invited by the town of Brookings, just 10 miles due east from Wheeler Ridge. Assured by the Japanese government he would not face a war criminal trial, Fujita served as Grand Marshal for the local Azalea Festival. At the festival, Fujita presented his family's 400-year-old katana to the city as a symbol of his regret. Brookings treated him with respect and affection. He would go on to make additional visits to Brookings, serving as an informal ambassador of peace and friendship. In 1995, Fujita sponsored 3 students from Brookings Harbor High School to visit Japan. They would present him with a decultory letter from Ronald Reagan. Fujita would make a last few visits to Brookings, and in 1992 he planted a tree at the bomb site as a gesture of peace. A few days before his death, Fujita was made an honorary citizen of Brookings on September 30, 1997, at the age of 85. In October of 1998, his daughter, Yoriko Asakura, buried some of his ashes at the bomb site. We hope you enjoyed this episode and hope you're going to join us for more Pacific War content next week. So don't forget to subscribe and press the bell button to get notified of our videos. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.